special welcome to them as well. And with it being 12:02, I think we'll go ahead and get rolling today. So a special good afternoon and welcome to Leadership Winston-Salem's Leaders in Lunch. I'm Catherine Perry. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Winston-Salem. And before we get started with our webinar today, I have a few opening remarks and reminders. This is Leadership Winston-Salem's recruitment season. So if you are not familiar with Leadership Winston-Salem and would like to become more so, I invite you to click on the link that our Administrative Director is getting ready to enter into the chat. If you are an alumni and know somebody who would be fantastic for our program, which starts this fall, we are having spring information sessions. So we would encourage you to click on the link that says nominate a candidate and share their information with us so that we might reach out to them. Leaders in Lunch is our way of staying in touch with our vast network of alumni and friends. We offer this every month and would encourage you to join us each month, the second or third Wednesday of each month, except for April, where we will be having a community conversation. So keep your eyes peeled to the Leadership Winston-Salem website, which is leadershipws.org. Today we'll be joined by Iris Cole, who's a graduate of the class of 2019. She's the founding partner at She Raises the Bar and founder and CEO of Do Good Artists, as well as Owens Daniels, who is a graduate of the class of 2021. He is a photographer, visual artist, and creative at Owens Daniels Photography. The panel discussion will be moderated today by Dr. William Carpenter, who is a graduate of the class of 2020. I'm sure you guys get the theme here, a lot of alumni, and he's the executive director at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Arts. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and Bill, we'd like you to get things rolling for us.
Well, great. Thank you very much. Welcome and hello, Iris and Owens. How are you?
Hey, Bill. Good to see you.
It's really great to see both of you. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with each of you individually. Owens, of course, had a great show here, I think maybe 2020, Owens, the Brown Bag project, was that right?
Yeah, 2020 was Brown Bag.
Yeah, wonderful photography exhibition. And of course, I see Owens now at Renolda. And Iris, you and I you've been helping Sika do some strategic planning and some community, brainstorming, I guess we might say. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, so I'm excited about this. I'm excited to talk about where arts are and where arts education and artist interactions with the community here in Winston-Salem. And so I'm just going to get started with that first question. It's, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourselves as an artist and how you see your work as an artist connecting you to the community of Winston-Salem. Iris, why don't you start?
Awesome. Thanks. So my history and my background started out as a professional in the arts. I'm a trained flutist and conductor. And so when I started out my career, I was really lucky, I think, to play with the symphony and conduct an orchestra and teach flute at a university. And so it was really, really wonderful. And I did that for many, many years. What I would call myself today is a multidisciplinary artist, because about 20 years ago, I moved into the corporate sphere, into the world of corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And over the course of my career, I realized that I just continued to use art and creativity is probably one of my most valuable tools in the work that I was doing in corporate. And so I really do bring it to the table frequently. I'm also a social entrepreneur in the arts. So I do a lot of work at the intersection of social impact, bringing artists to the table with companies and organizations to do that work. So if I were to ping myself right now, it's really multidisciplinary arts.
Great. I can't wait. I want to talk more about that social entrepreneurship and really the role of art in what we might say is the larger economy. So let's put a pin on that for a second. But Owens, how about you? Tell us yourself about the artist and how that art connects you to Winston-Salem.
Very good question. For those that don't know me, my name is Owens Daniels. I work mainly in portraiture, life events, and contemporary art. I came to art several different ways. The main way I came is I was a kid on bad behavior, restricted to my room with nothing in it. And so, like all kids, I doodle on things. And I made a stick figure for my mother. And it made her very happy. And it made her happy enough to take that stick figure and put it on the family refrigerator. And when my father came home, my father looked at me and said, "Boy, did you do that?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Good." And that's the moment that I realized that I needed my mother's love and my father's respect. And they also gave me an adage that has propelled me in my work ever since that time. And I'll tie it all together. They said, everybody has a story to tell. Boy, just tell what you see. And that I take into the art world as artists, we are responsible for the voices in our communities, if not the world itself, whether it's art history, or if it's current events such as the Ukraine, when you have the 100 mothers that have cell phones and those type of things. We are responsible for finding the message of whatever that message is, whether it's a social message, whether it's a medical message, but to give that message some type of visual or auditable voice. And so that's what a social part of being in Winston-Salem. You know, Winston-Salem sits between Raleigh and Charlotte and Greensboro, and they're larger art markets. But where Winston-Salem really shined or shone was in 2020 when they had all of the unrest. And when you started to look at what was going on, when you looked in the newspaper, when you looked at my work, you could really see where you could get a very strong sense of the trauma and the conflict in the community itself about what's to protest, what's to demonstrate, what does all of those things look like. And artists like myself and newspapers gave the community that visual and that voice. So those type of things, like my father and mother said, God rest their souls. So everybody's got a story. My job is that to tell what I see.
Sure, that's great. Let's dive into both of those ideas for a second, because I think, Iris, you're talking about social entrepreneurship, which imagines that there is a social responsibility for our businesses that are emerging, but also that I think being involved in social stuff can be marketable, right? Can be profitable. And Owens, you're really thinking about art as messaging for our time.
Yes.
But you also, I think of yourself as an entrepreneur, and that you're trying to sell your art, right? You're trying to make a living as an artist. What is the way in which we define for people the responsibility of it, and why should people care that artists want to take this responsibility, or that why should people give artists this responsibility?
You know, to Owen's point, where art comes into play is in that storytelling, whether we're telling history, whether we're telling current events, whether we're trying to provoke, whether we're trying to create empathy in our community. Art is one of the greatest, and creativity is one of the greatest tools that we have at our disposal to create dialogue, to, again, create empathy, to bring people around a cause. It's in some ways non-threatening, but highly provoking.
Correct.
And so it's something that people want to engage with. You know, I can look at it from that standpoint. I can also look at it on in a completely different angle, because, you know, if I were to say we take creativity out of the equation, or we take art out of the equation, the chair you're sitting in wouldn't exist.
Right.
The background behind me or behind you or behind Owens wouldn't exist, because creativity is even broader than we sometimes think it is, right? Sometimes we pigeonhole it into just being fine art, but creativity and art encompass all sorts of design, tourism, products, marketing, and things that sometimes we don't connect with art. And so, if it were to disappear from our society, I can't even imagine what it would be. But the arts contribute to not only a wonderful quality of life, and I will tell you, I've lived in an art city pretty much most of my life. There are more arts per capita in Winston-Salem than any place I've ever lived. And we really just sometimes don't see it. But I want, before I turn it over to Owens, I want to connect dots with art's power to create social change and economic development. It is so powerful in that sphere. And I think that is where I see this community going, is really leveraging its history with art and creativity, and really moving it into this post-COVID environment where it's driving social change and economic development here. I'll give you a real quick example, but the National Black Theater Festival, that brings 60,000 people to Winston-Salem, right? And people come and they enjoy it. They learn so much through the content. They spend money in restaurants and hotels. And so the economic impact of something like that festival is profound. So just a quick example of the connection there.
Thank you. Owens, what are you thinking?
To piggyback on Iris, first, the arts provides the artist the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. And that entrepreneurship feeds the entire economic apparatus around, say, Winston-Salem, from billboards to graphics to art on the wall. Whether you walking into a bank doing a transaction and there's this pleasant atmosphere because there's this art there, from the artist ideal that they can produce something from themselves that provides a part of the economical part. The National Black Theater, your concerts that come here, and all of the graphics and all of those things that go into the advertising that has to be done. The artists drive that, as well as the story. The other side of it is, for art to be commercial, the artist has to have resources to continue to do the art. No different if Sika, in order for the doors to be open, that exhibition has to generate something, but it comes from the art itself. And so the last thing I want to say about it is, it gives us art from an economical sense. It gives you a sense of self-worth and validation. And I think a lot of people don't think of it that way. When you get paid for your art, no different than any other profession or any other craft, it means that it has some sense of value. A lot of times you hear people say, and I'm sure Iris has heard this all her life as well, well, I really like that. I really like the way you play a flute, or Owens, I really like your work. And I always tell people, they always say, Owens, I love your work. And I always stop people and remind them, yes, I think you like my work, but you don't love my work. Because if you love my work, it'll be hanging in your house on your wall. Because everything in your house that of value, you paid for. You stood in line for it, you've ordered it, you've had it delivered, you've looked it up, you went through all of these other things to have it. And that's not a blight, but for the artist to give them some sense of economic value, which will allow them to continue to do the art, then they have to have that sense of the commercial.
We had a very similar we think about this a lot at Seek, I should say. And, Owens is a part of our portable gallery, in which we have a piece of Owens, wonderful photograph of Owens, from Owens, in this collection that we bring to local schools and regional community centers. And just recently went up to Surrey County and had 680 students walking past your photo, that photograph. But we made a legitimate offer to you for that photograph, right? And we wanted you to tell us precisely what that photograph would go for on the market. And the reason we do that is because often when you're working with artists who may not have the best training as entrepreneurs, and you're coming at them from Sika and you're like, we love this piece, we'd love to have this in our portable gallery. And they'll say, oh, well, just maybe give me $50 for it or something. Mm-hmm. We're like, no. Like, what is it worth? What is it, if this were to be sold, what would you sell it to us for? Because that's one of the most immediate ways for us to support the artist, right? But it gets me to my next question. And then I swear I want to talk about your own individual project, but I always love talking about systems things first, right? But what systems are in place in Winston-Salem for us to support artists as entrepreneurs, to support artists as thriving members of our economy? What do we have and what do we need in place?
That's a great question.
That's a really, not, what I found in Winston is that Winston really doesn't have a system in place so much as a system itself to support the local artist. Take Sika, take Renota, which are your main, I've arrived if I've shown exhibited in one of those two places, down to like Artworks, Arts for Art's Sake, which is the other end. Outside of, and Iris can correct me if I'm wrong, outside of really selling your own work, that I know of, there's not a system. And the only other way I would say that has been very helpful and helped me was the Keenan Institute, when they've had Creative Lab, Creative Catalyst, those type of things that came from the School of the Arts. Those type of systems are not as, unfortunately, as known as they should be known, but they are very powerful systems. Outside of that, I don't know of another system. I have suggested things and have ideas of things, but I'm just not aware.
Yeah, I always think, Owens, that we have all of these entrepreneur startups or, launching pad places in Winston.
We do have those things, but they're not really geared toward artists in the sense that we know artists. Myself, when I go to something like a startup, I have to sit there and I have to distill the information that I'm receiving down to how does it affect or what does it have to do with me. And when people think of startups, generally it's like, I remember when I was a kid, you didn't copy something, you Xerox something. That meant that it was copied. And startup to me is that type of word as well. That means that you have some kind of software or something in that area, that kind of thing. Not a startup as I am starting a art t-shirt business from that standpoint. I give you another system that's been very helpful, like Leadership Winston-Salem. Tying artists into those type of things are actually more valuable than tying them directly into dollar things.
Yeah, I'm seeing questions here in the chat. There are galleries here that sell local, the work of local artists. There are galleries that exhibit their work. There are a lot of businesses in town that exhibit work. Hotels and restaurants and things that are exhibiting visual art. Lots of places to play and perform. Although sometimes the nightlife gets cut a little bit short, where things are closing down early. And so for the entertainment scene, those extended hours are really important. We have, venues, historic venues like the Stevens Center, and I'm happy to say that monies were just put forth to help with that renovation. And so really taking care of space that we have and looking at extended space to have performances and interactions, I think is always a good thing. In terms of the entrepreneurship side of things, we have a pretty robust entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so it is open to artists, and there are many artists that do participate within it. There's the Center for Creative Economy that's specifically for artists that want to start businesses. And then the Keenan Institute does some training in terms of entrepreneurship. There's also, School of the Arts is highly unique here in this community. It's one of the first public arts conservatories in the country, and it is pumping out amazing artists who you have seen on every show you've probably watched in the last 2 years, particularly. So there are. And I would be bereft to not mention that we have the first arts council in the country. And that arts council is supporting local artists and creating partnerships and connectivity between artists. But I think one of the things that I'd really love to see is more space where artists can connect in these multidisciplinary ways. How do we cross paths with nonprofits and organizations and businesses to drive innovation and beauty and really sort of continue to live into that arts and innovation moniker.
So that gets to really, I think, what you're arguing there is the importance of collaboration, right? And how collaboration can drive both the individual's art, right, and then what's happening in the community. I wonder if you could folks maybe speak to ways in which you experience collaboration, ways in which you seek it out, ways in which, as a community, we might be able to foster or facilitate some of that collaboration.
I'll say to start that artists are highly trained in collaboration.
Yeah.
And so, I was thinking as I was getting ready for this talk that I was just thinking about my past as a conductor. And so, not only as a flutist and a conductor, I was just trained to listen really carefully for every little nuance, for every little thing that might be going awry, because it was my job to fix it and get it back on track. It was really my job to interpret and bring out the intention of the composer. And so there were a lot of skills that I learned there that I put into everyday practice. And so there's something inherent about that training that I think an interaction with an artist can really be leveraged. And I seek it out all the time. It's really become part of my ethos. I always feel that the products that I produce and the art that I produce is way better when I've had a great team involved with it and great collaboration from the community. Because in the work that I do, which is very, very much social justice oriented, it is absolutely critical that the voice of the stakeholders that are most impacted by the work I do are at the table. So.
Owens, how about you? Collaboration.
Collaboration. First, I want to address something that's in the chat.
Yeah.
I want to make sure people are clear. There are lots of galleries in Winston-Salem, from the Arts District all the way to Seeker. Two, they're very supportive in businesses as finding places to exhibit your work. But exhibit is not a system. I just want to make sure we clear. You asked a question about system.
Yeah, go ahead on that. I'd like to hear your
We're
thoughts.
talking about places you can exhibit, from Delert to Art Unleashed, all the way to Seeker, all the way to Road. They are nice places to exhibit, and you can get exposed, but it is not a system, it's a strategy. And that strategy has played for me well. When you talk about systems, you go down to Innovation Quarter and they have systems for entrepreneurs. They have systems for a small business person. When you go into something like the Keenan Lab, that's a system to build upon that helps you structure things together to move in a certain direction. So you have a system and you have a strategy. They go together, but they're two separate things. I just want to make sure that I wasn't glossing over that there are not places that you cannot exhibit. You can, but that's not a system. And I'm a living example of that. Right. So as far as collaboration is concerned, one of the places that I found by going through this system itself is being interconnected with these type of places by having this exposure to something like Creative Lab that has allowed me to be exposed to an ecosystem that I'm unaware of. An example of, if I was never exposed to Creative Lab itself when it first started, I would have never became a fellow at Renoda because I was very unaware of that. If I had never went through Creative Catalyst, I would never have been exposed to the opportunities that were afforded me at Seeker. I'm already a member at Artworks Gallery. I'm already in the Arts District. I'm already showing in a restaurant. But those exposures allow me the opportunity to see the world bigger than it is. Imagine if you are starting out as a store clerk, what happens when you become a CEO of the store? Look at all the experiences that you go through and all the experiences that you will experience up to that point. And that is what I mean when I don't see a system so much in play, whether it's the Arts Council, which is its own experience in getting a grant, that's a good system. Public art, being involved in the different entrepreneur programs as Winston-Salem becoming stellar for, all of those things an artist has to cobble together to put together a system that would help them become successful with their strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great conversation to have in front of current and future leaders of Winston-Salem, because it's really about what does the city and the region need to do. If you're going to call yourself the city of arts and innovation, what are you doing to foster the arts part of that? And not to say that they're actually separate. I think arts and innovation go together, makes sense. But what are you doing? Yeah, of course. I mean, they're not two different things. But what are you doing to foster the artists there, right? I mean, my experience with that was when I was talking to artists and they were telling me, and I went to graduate school for English, not for fine arts, but they were talking to me about the workshop experience in their college and graduate, experiences. And that these workshops are super intense and you're constantly getting feedback and you're constantly getting critique. And then once you graduate, that goes away. And what has to happen, for example, is some people actually have to pay critics to come into their studio and to give them the feedback that they were getting while they were in school or whatever. And it seems like, what do we as to Iris's point, we rely on art for everything we do. And for almost all of our downtime, there's something artistic happening within that. What do we do as a city to foster that? What are the opportunities and the avenues to build the system, Owens, that I think, you're saying is not, it has to be scrapped together by the individual, him or herself?
Correct. You as an individual, you have to scrap it together. but you brought up the word collaboration.
Right.
We have to be, as artists, at least in my situation, the Long Ranger will only serve you so well. It's great. It's great to be independent, but if you want to be a hybrid artist, and I totally believe in that. That's something that I didn't believe in for a very long time. You got to do everything yourself, and you produce the product and all those things, but you lose out on so much experience and so much information and so much sharing and so much, and more, the most important thing I think you miss out on is this discovery of yourself, the collaborative spirit. You can get that through internships. You can get that through fellowships. You can get that, again, like I said, being connected to things like art councils, being connected to things like School of the Arts, being connected in some kind of way, and being collaborative artists, creating these workshops that can be continued, that can be supported. And I think that is the thing, and that will be very helpful in bringing all of these strategies and systems together under a roof like the Keenan Project itself, to where it can be a clear path to where you want to go as an artist. And that is, I've always seen that ever since I started the Creative Lab. And I'm not blowing the horn of Keenan or Leadership Winston-Salem. I'm
Sure, they won't mind.
I'm a drum major for both of them, because I know how impactful, and I know how potent, and I know how directional it was for me when I took it on and added it to my plan. And so if it done it for me, I'm always telling other artists, these are the things you want to look into. Any entrepreneur program, any leadership program, all of these things to add to your toolbox, and then share that with other artists. And so that's been my plan.
Yeah.
Paris, what do you
You know, I was sitting here writing some things down as I was listening to Owens. I think certainly being a patron of the arts is really important. To show up, to be present, to purchase. And so being that patron's important. I think, for me, I wrote down 4 things. The second one is a mind shift. And what I mean by that is, rather than, throw something out that is arts for art's sake, or, there's always a purpose. I'm of that thinking, whether it's just to process something, right? Doing art to process something. I always think there's a purpose, but creating a mind shift where the arts are not just about quality of life, but that they actually drive social and economic value is really, really important. There's this great example that I learned about many years ago in Colombia, where they took, they had a light display at Christmas. I think I've shared this example with you, Bill, but, let's just take our Tanglewood Festival of Lights. So something of that nature. And it was a cultural thing for the community, but they had some communities that were experiencing poverty in this city in Colombia. And so the government one year decided that rather than them putting up the Christmas lights that year, they would hire in this community that had been experiencing poverty to put the lights up, take them down, be part of that experience. And so it generated a seasonal income. Then they moved the needle a little bit on that. And then they said, well, let's create a company that manufactures Christmas lights. And then they hired that community in that same community. And now it's a full-time business generating all sorts of revenue and also creating financial stability for a community. And so there's a social and an economic driver there. And then they expanded that Christmas lights display to the point where it's now a National Geographic tourism destination during the Christmas season. So for me, it's one of the most unique examples of how we can take these creative assets that we have, and we can just start to build additional value, social and economic value, and see those assets
Yeah.
maybe a little bit differently than we have before.
I guess the thing that I would, because I appreciate what you're saying there. I'm trying to anticipate somebody who would say, you're talking about massive state funding and state supporting of this at a level that I don't know that we see in this country anymore. If we ever did, I think we did at previous times. We don't really see it so much anymore. I mean, how do you respond to those complaints that this is way too much government support for one particular area?
Well,
sorry to go that way with it, but I'm curious.
No. I mean, certainly, we want local, regional, federal, support when that's available. But for me, that's more of an entrepreneurship story than anything else. It was almost, in some senses, just a turnover into a bootstrapping entrepreneurship story, but it was leveraging an artistic, cultural asset to do it. So I just think, that innovation and that entrepreneurship that's where the real opportunity lies, is in to drive a different mindset around how we think about the arts, and just sort of look at the opportunities that we have. I think another mindset shift is, what's the value of a creative within your organization? I'm a musician in terms of my training, but what I do on a day-to-day basis is I'm in companies helping them drive community engagement and DEI and social impact within their organization. So that's what I do every day. And I bring, maybe because of my creative training, something a little bit different to the table. And so, how do we open spaces? How do we open spaces for artists within other perhaps areas that,
Sure.
Yeah.
Owens, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Like, what is the value of hiring creatives into other kinds of businesses? I mean, why would a bank want to hire a creative as either a consultant or someone in the managerial position?
Well, it's in the question itself. Artists are the people who think outside of the box. We're the ones who are creative. Innovation only means that you're taking something that's already there. You're not really creating anything and giving it a new purpose. What a person who thinks about that outside of the mainstream, outside of the status quo, is the artist. When I came to Renoda, I brought a different type of energy to Renoda, especially when I'm in the position of community engagement. How do you engage a community differently, other than, for lack of a better word, same old, same old? Artists, we're the ones who think outside of the box of what is there and what can be there, and what's innovative ways that we can do that. We bring a different skill set, a different vision. We bring all these different things. No different if you were to, and I always use a foreigner. I remember when I was a young man in the military and I went to Europe for the very first time. Well, to the people who lived in that area, that's a small village, but to me, this was this old village and all these other things. And I could describe a person's habitat to them much more creatively and imaginatively. They fell in love with their own environment, because I saw that environment with fresh eyes. I saw it differently. And that is the down and the dirty of what bringing an artist in, outside of the basic skill sets that person would need to do. Like you said, if I came to a bank and they wanted me to work with them in some capacity, I would have to bring some other than my artist skills. But my artist skills are my strong suit. And that is what I would depend on to infect the status quo and change the status quo.
Infect the status quo. That's fascinating. You know, I think about this a lot when coming out of higher ed and thinking about how we get students hired. And, you know, you have a lot of students who get what we used to call traditional degrees, and whether it be the humanities or the arts. And sometimes their resumes don't even get read because there's resumes that say business administration or whatever else it might be. And I wonder what's happening to us in the professional sphere, that we are so siloizing, I don't think that's the word, but we're so sort of, categorizing people and really demanding that our young people get really specific kinds of training that may not expand beyond that. So I guess the roundabout way, what's the role of arts in education? What do we need to do? I mean, what should arts and what should the relationship between arts and education be?
Well, I can tell you this, not to cut eyes off. This is something that I've experienced, again, being where I am with Renova. You touched upon it when an artist or a student comes out of school and they don't have much experience, from where the institution sets, it has a cookie cutter approach of job description. The job description says all of these things, and it's based upon all of the status quo's ideal of what a candidate looks like. If they have these things, then it's a pretty good chance, or this is what we're looking for. On the leadership side, it's up to that leader to be innovative and thinking and saying, yes, they may have the reading, writing, and the arithmetic. We can work with that, but they bring another set of tools that if we're going to move forward as an institution, let's look at these new tools. And that is what an art student would bring into an institution. And that is what I found to be, as the world changes, institutions have to change. Not that you wouldn't bring a skill set that you would need, but from the ideal of the leadership itself, looking forward to where they want to go, are we going to bring in people with a different set of skill sets? And art students bring an entire school set, different set that I've been most impressed. When I was up at School of the Arts shooting events and all those things, and I've never been on the campus of School of the Arts, and I saw those hardworking kids and all of the things that they did. And I thought to myself, why wouldn't you hire this type of person? They're innovative, they're artistic, they're creative, they're hardworking. They change the paradigm. They're looking to change it for the better, to move it forward. So, but if leadership doesn't look in that way, and they stick to what's on that piece of paper, they got to have this, and this, and this, then they're constantly going to get people who can do that, but then they die out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was thinking about the training earlier, and I teach a course on innovation and entrepreneurship, but a lot of the focus of the course has to do with translatability. So from the training point of the artist, we definitely have to do better in making sure that training includes what their passion is, but also, what does the world need from you?
Yeah.
And so, what I talk a lot about in my course is what Owens was saying earlier, is the toolbox. How do we fill your toolbox with all of these amazing skill sets? And then how do we teach you how to translate those skills into all sorts of different spheres, right? And then on the other end, we have to train the other side of the equation to say, that has a lot of value at the table when we're trying to innovate, when we're trying to create empathy, when we're trying to build relationships. So it has value. In early education, The arts are really, really critical to just humanize things. Get our hands dirty and paint and have fun and do all these things. But, we have a really interesting model here in Winston-Salem in the arts-based school. If you haven't seen that, it's downtown, where the entire curriculum of the school is just baked with arts. So a child is learning, the structure of cells by putting things on a paper plate and pasting it, and actually creating that learning. So it's doing and learning by doing. There's a great program in one of our elementary schools where vocal coaches are going in and working with second language, English as a second language students. And there's just all sorts of interesting and creative applications that are super important in education, because not everybody learns the same also, right? Some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, and it's important to have a lot of different mechanisms to educate young people.
I think, when there was a lot of debates about teaching of literature and all of that, and moving towards teaching nonfiction rather than fiction and literary fiction. And a lot of the findings that came out was that, you're missing out on these opportunities to teach empathy, and not just to teach it, but to demonstrate it, to actually encounter it. I'm thinking again, Owens, of your picture in our portable gallery, and we've got a wonderful story of a young Black girl who saw that in a school in Kernersville, and she reported never having been to a museum prior to that. And here she was seeing this picture of protesters or demonstrators from Black Lives Matter in Winston-Salem, and then your picture and your bio, and she's like, I see myself, right? And I see something that resonates with me. There's a real importance to that. And so I wonder, we'll get to some questions, and then I also want to give you all a chance to talk about what you're working on right now. But Owens, what is the relationship between art and social action or change? Like what should people know about what artists are trying to do? This loops us back, I think, to the start of the conversation.
Well, art and social justice and change, for me as an artist, is just reminding the general public or the world that we are human. And that's what empathy comes in, is the glue and the nectar of being. The glue is we're just not protesters. We're just not demonstrators. We're just not rebel rousers that are marching down the street, and you're having your beer and your lunch and your dinner, and somebody marches past. There are things there that will affect you just as they will affect me. That's where the empathy, I can feel my brother's pain. I'm not always connected in every kind of way where I sympathize with them, but I can understand. That is, for me, the biggest thing in my work, creating work and displaying that work that someone can walk in from another walk of life and understand the person. Not so much the movement, but understand, if I stepped on your foot and your foot hurts and it was wrong for me to step on your foot, then you understand why I'm in pain and I am upset on having my foot stepped on. Empathy also is the nectar. It sometimes brings people, particularly corporations, out of the statuesque position of, I don't feel anything. It's not my problem. It's not my business. So you can draw upon that empathy like a nectar, and you can consume it and get something from it and become a part of it, because the whole point again is I understand. And as an artist, I try to create work to get you to that place of understanding the person. And I understand that young little girl, because that picture was made in a way so that anybody could stand there and look at that and say, you know what? I understand that. Someone stepped on my foot and it was wrong. So I understand why you are upset about somebody stepping on your foot and it was wrong. And if I understand it, then I can deal with it, because the first person I have to deal with is me.
I think a lot too about moving people from empathy into compassion, where compassion is actually driving you to create some kind of change, right? Compassion is driving you to affect a difference in some way,
Yeah.
you know. And I think oftentimes we tend to stop at empathy, right? Oh, that is terrible. I totally understand why that's terrible. And then we stop. But what powerful art can do, it seems, is also push us into compassion, where we're like, I've got to do something to alleviate that situation. I've got to be a part of this in some way.
A prime example of that is Turner's painting The Slave Ship.
Yep.
I don't know if nobody's ever seen it, I suggest anybody look it up and see it. That is well past compassion, well past it. It's all compassion to see that work itself. And that's my goal. But also sometimes as an artist, you have to recognize your role and where you are. You may not be there yet. And sometimes as artists, we can get pushed into places and roles to try to create or be something that we're not ready for that yet. So I understand the idea, I understand the discussion of compassion, but if you're not at that mature level to create that type of work yet, the goal may be to get there.
Yeah. Iris, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's so many different purposes for art. I was thinking about all of the creative content that we turned to during COVID, right? Just as an escape, and some respite, perhaps. But I think the work that you're talking about is really important. And I agree with Owens that it's a journey. And I would say, it is about empathy, so that, and then moving to compassion, but then it is going that extra step to action. And, over the last 3 years, I've invested a huge amount of time into a project called Unseen, which is a virtual reality experience that raises awareness about human trafficking. And people thought I was utterly nuts for even attempting to tackle that subject matter in virtual reality, right? Which years ago it was just really new and exciting and scary. I think it's still scary because there's just a lot of ethics we need to think about. But, what I'll tell you is that it's one of the most powerful pieces of work that I've ever been involved with. And there's nothing like putting yourself in the shoes of someone who has experienced something to create that empathy. But one of the things I learned very, very clearly through collaboration with nonprofits and survivors and, just people on the front line of human trafficking is that you have to create a sense of hope. And if your work isn't creating a sense of hope, then people won't take action. And then you have to give them very, very clearly what to do so that they'll take that next step. So I think it's just something that we have to be really, really conscious about as we're taking on the responsibility of producing that type of work, that we're really intentional about those things, and that we're also really intentional about creating a sense of hope instead of harm, because we can do that as well.
Owens, we've got maybe a minute and a half if you want to kind of share what you're working on right now, or most recent projects.
Real quick, I'm working on becoming more of a hybrid artist from the ideal of stills and videos together. I'm very interested in mental health itself, things like COVID, things like gun violence, those type of things that mental health plays a role in documentary work, visual work, to bring hope to the public. And how can you be driven to become a part of the solution to these things? So I use these, using video now and using stills to create these conversations and give these issues voices. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Wonderful. This was great. I hope that I know I deviated from some of the pre-written questions. I hope that was I hope that was okay. But I found this a fascinating conversation. I want to thank both of you for your time. Thank you.
Yes, loved it. Appreciate being a part of it.
Bill, Iris, and Owens, thank you so much for your time today. I saw a lot of great comments that entered into our chat. I know that we have a lot of passionate arts advocates in our community, and you touched on a lot of great points of interest for us to take into consideration as we are the City of Arts and Innovation. So thank you all for your time. I would also like to give a special thanks to Jack Elster, a member of the class of 2021, who is also a member of our Alumni Council, who organized this Leaders in Lunch today and worked with Bill, Owens, and Iris to set this opportunity up for all of us. So my many thanks to Jack, to